2nd century BC, we had the arrival of the first Roman legions. And the Romans were able to cover the whole Iberian Peninsula, divided it into 3 different provinces, and they settled here. They organized the country with their organized legions, politics and religion. So all was Roman, including the language. So local languages were forbidden during the Roman occupation, and only Latin was allowed as a language. And that is why our languages are originally Latin languages. The Romans were building roads. These roads were important, they were their highways in those times, because legions had to move from province to province, city to city, to control local people and also to charge taxes. So they needed good roads. And an excellent road was built all over the peninsula, covering the most important cities, including Lisbon, Ulicipo Felicitas Julia, Coimbra, Aeminio was the name, going on to Portus, and then ending at Braga. Braga is nowadays our spiritual capital. It's the head of the Portuguese Christian Church, and in those days was an important city, Roman city, called Bracara Augusta. So this road developed the area, and Aeminio, this city, became important. Well, the Romans were here until the 4th century AD, time when we had the decline and the fall of the Roman Empire and the arrival of the first German tribes. The Visigoths were here, organized. They had Toledo as their main city to irradiate all the points of the peninsula. And they were the ones to introduce the first bishops and bishoprics here in the peninsula. But unfortunately, not long after they arrived, we had the new invasions coming from the south. The Muslims, they came in and they invaded the whole of the Iberian Peninsula, and this city became Muslim in those days. So we have a wall, what's left from the wall, and the old Medina, the area that was occupied by the Muslims. In the meantime, in the north of the peninsula, several Christian kings were reorganizing themselves for the reconquest of this territory to the Muslims. So we have this reconquest starting quite early in the 9th century. The Arabs arrived in the 8th century, 711. So this reconquest was made bit by bit, and this part that is nowadays Portugal was reconquered by the first Christian king called Alphonse I, and is going to conquer Coimbra as one step going south, and he established the crown here. So we say that Coimbra became the very first official capital of this newborn kingdom, Christian kingdom. So this was the very first capital. With the reconquest of Lisbon, Coimbra loses the title of capital to Lisbon, but not so long after that is going to gain another title, the title of a university city. So we have Coimbra as one of Europe's first medieval universities. It was founded in 1291. This university became very important, together with Salamanca, with Sorbonne in France, with Oxford, with Bologna, and Padua in Italy. So the very first studies here started at the end of the 13th century, with a few, 2 or 3 faculties, and then the studies started to becoming more and more important, and Coimbra became the university city of Portugal until the 20th century. We had a dictatorship until 1974. On the 25th of April 1974, we had a revolution to have a democratic country. And since then, Portugal is a democracy. And this was the end of the 70s. So the 80s will bring us decentralization of studies and healthcare. So we want to reach all points of Portugal. We don't want to leave anyone away from a school, a high school, or a university, or even on the side of the healthcare. Our healthcare system was spreading all over the country to give everybody the possibility of having a doctor as well as having a teacher. So with this decentralization of studies and healthcare, we have nowadays, and along all the 80s and 90s, and a development in the country that made possible for us to have nowadays universities all over the country, public universities. We are talking about public studies, which are the best in the country. We have private universities, private high schools, but most families choose public universities and schools because they have excellent level of studies. But sometimes, because we do not have the level required in studies, we must some parents must take their children to the private schools, and those are expensive. Public school is not paid for. During university time, there is a payment, an annual payment that is the highest it can be is 800 euros a year, and this is for the wealthy families. So the amount of money each student pays for the public university directly depends on the family's annual income.
Wow.
If the income is low, the student will pay less or nothing. And if the income is low in a way that they can't possibly pay, then the government will give a subsidy to help the family having their children studying wherever they want in a university, in a public university. So it's a good system. We like it, and we give more when coming out to a normal working life after studies. We most companies give they give easily jobs to those with a diploma from a public university. So having a public university diploma is really it's of good value to have the first job. So this is Coimbra. Coimbra is nowadays the university city. I wanted just to tell you about this important position of University of Coimbra. We would all like to study in Coimbra, but it's not possible because every year we have more than 150,000 students, and Coimbra cannot take those that much. So we have studying here at University of Coimbra every year about 25,000 students maximum. The rest study in different public universities spread around the country. We're now turning right hand side, and this is Sofia's street. Sofia. This street was all open from left to the right with buildings that were helping the university with classes, with rooms for the students. We had here convents. So all this is a street that was open to give the university more buildings and more public areas. One person was very important here. Fernando, that young boy that liked the church and chose to come to Coimbra to study. And when he came here, he met for the first time Franciscans. So he became really impressed by the Franciscan life. He decided to go and explore the Mediterranean and ended up in Assisi. St. Anthony, the future St. Anthony studied here on the right hand side where the city hall is nowadays, was the monastery where he had made his studies before he left the country, still as Fernando, to meet St. Francis in Assisi. Beautiful garden on the right hand side, the Renaissance garden. See,
That's pretty.
it was designed by the king himself, John III. He looked at his little corner, enjoyed it, and said, "This is my little garden." So he designed it and asked the architects to build it for him back in the 17th century. Now, if you look on your left-hand side, you'll be seeing some panels of azulejos. That is the Portuguese word and also Spanish azulejo for tiles, the glazed tiles. Look here on your left-hand side, you have different pictures, let's say, of important buildings in the city.
The tiles are beautiful.
The university, the cathedrals, the parks. It's 20th century decoration, of course. So this is the avenue, main avenue of Coimbra, that was opened in the 19th century to give Coimbra a new residential area. And Coimbra was born on top of the hill, here on the right hand side, top of the hill. So, a little maze, if you can imagine, Medina, in the old Medina. Nowadays, that is the students' paradise, because that's where they have their rooms, when they're staying here for studies, that's where they meet. They have their little republics, as they call them. It's associations and places where they meet after school, after classes. And we have the Coimbra's Academic Association as well, that is located here. And the university has a new campus that are now in new modern sections of the city. Left hand side, the monument to the First World War. Remember, we were... Não podemos ir por aqui, temos que ir pela outra agora. Remember that we were involved in the First World War. On the right hand side, AAC, the Coimbra's Academic Association for the Students. They like to wear a typical costume that is composed by a huge black cloak over their shoulders. In the past, students had their uniforms. They were uniformized because we didn't want to look at students and see that they were well dressed or not so well because of their social position. We didn't want to make distinction. So all of them dressed the same way. And this way, you don't see this social distinctions between them. So that's why the use of a uniform was a must and mandatory when if we talk about the centuries ago. Now, going up these stairs, we're not going that way, but up these stairs here on the right hand side, we have the campus that was built back in the end of the 60s. It's not much used nowadays. Yes, we have administration, the rector's house, ceremony places and places for the final exams, but we have brand new campus now in the outskirts of Coimbra. Now I would like to show you a statue of John Paul II. It's here on the left hand side because he visited Lucia here several times when he visited Coimbra, and that's why we have the statue here. This aqueduct, we're passing under the arch now, you can see it on both sides, was built to bring water to the palace of the king that was also on top of the hill. Later the king just went to Lisbon and they were not occupying the palace, So he donated his palace to the university. And the water was still running until the 19th century because it reached the university and was giving the students sweet drinkable water. On the right hand side is the Botanical Garden. So this is Coimbra's Botanical Garden. It's a beautiful garden, beautiful 17th century construction, later adapted in the 19th century as the Botanical Garden. These were gardens used by the king as their own private gardens when they were here. So at this point, we'll make a little deviation uphill here on the left-hand side to show you the place where Lucia was living, where she was buried the first year after her death. So she died in March 2005 and she was buried here until March 2006. And then her body was taken to Fatima to stay side by side with Saint Jacinta, where we saw her. But this is where she lived. We have to think about the place with not so many constructions in those days. We're talking about a few years after the apparitions. So, 1917, the apparitions happened. She joins the Dominicans in Fatima, but Dominicans are not cloistered nuns, so she could come out, and she always had lots of people by the gate of the monastery, of the convent, waiting for her. She decides to leave after the death of Francisco and Jacinta. She decides to leave, and she looks for a place with peace in Galicia, and she goes to the Dominicans convent in Galicia, in Pontevedra. Oh my God, I don't know how he misses the cars.
I don't either.
I don't look. I think that the bureaus are all
Technically have one.
so narrow, so narrow. Oh my God.
They're so strong because, you know, it's a uphill always.
Yeah.
You drive to
There he goes, and well, for him it's like, oh, it is nothing.